In this lesson, you will be introduced to API calls in formula URL fields, which will help with process automation within an application. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to create a button that will execute an API call. Adding formula URL fields that contain API calls is essential in automating business processes. With these field types, you can add records to tables and edit records, which will improve workflow. In the last lesson, you were introduced to using the QuickBase API. You can also use the API to execute calls from within the application. The syntax for the API call within a formula URL field is a little different than what you see in the API guide. There are a couple elements that are used when using the API in a formula URL field, as opposed to using the API in a browser or from a server. Formula URL field is the field type that will be used to create the button. You will need to create the field in order to create the API call within the application. URL root is the root of the current URL address in your browser. Table alias. The alias for any table can be found under the Tables Properties, Advanced Properties section. It is a good idea to use the alias when referencing tables because they will never change, whereas the DBID of the table might. An example of when a DBID will change is when a copy of an application is created. Below is an example of a table alias for a table named projects. Using API add record within an application will automatically add a record to the specified table. You will want to pass any required or desired values to the new record. Here is an example of the API add record formula that adds a new record to the projects table. You have the option to redirect when executing this call. The redirect is especially useful so the end user does not see the XML response from the API call. Here is that same call with a redirect to the application homepage. Now let's see this call inside an application. We will click the Add Record button that will create a project called New Project with a status of Started and a priority of High. As you can see, we are redirected back to the home page of the application. Now let's see the new record. API Gen Add Record form allows the user to add a new record to the specified table. The difference between API Gen Add Record form and API Add Record is that with API Gen Add Record form, the user is taken to the Add Record page, where they are allowed to add details and save the record. You can also pass values, as you do in API Add Record. The syntax for this call is the same as API Add Record, but the behavior in the application is different. Let's click the Gen Add Record Form button, where we will be taken to the form. The call has populated the fields, so all we have to do is save. However, you could use this call if the user needs to add additional details. Once you have the syntax down, most of the API calls from a formula URL field look very similar. API Edit Record is very similar to API Add Record. However, you are specifying the record that will be edited. Like API Add Record, you will most likely want to redirect to avoid the end user from being presented with the XML response. Here's an example of API Edit Record. The call is changing the status to closed for the record that was added to the projects table for API Add Record. Here we will click the Edit Record button. We have created the call to change the status to closed where record ID equals 5. Let's view the record. Creating API calls using formula URL fields is essential in automating business processes within applications. End users can automatically add or edit records, which will improve workflow. As a QSP, you will be in a great position to create demand and differentiate yourselves from other partners with the application of advanced formulas. Now that you have completed this lesson, you will be able to create a button that will execute an API call.